Sometimes the real war begins after the medals are boxed away. It wasn't the push that hurt him. It was the laughter. When 82-year-old Franklin Hayes hit the pavement outside a gas station in Rockfield, Texas, he didn't cry out. He didn't even flinch. His palms were scraped, his hip ached, and blood pooled slowly at his temple. But all around him, life moved on. A woman rushed her toddler away. A teenager smirked while recording on his phone. And 5 bikers stood in a circle, laughing like schoolyard bullies, amused by the collapse of a man who once crawled through jungles half a world away so they could live free. They thought it was over. They thought they'd humiliated a stranger no one would defend. But what they didn't know was that somewhere deep in a locked drawer, beneath a faded photo and an old dog tag, sat a phone number that hadn't rung in over 40 years. And today it would. Thank you for being here. Sometimes, the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now, let's take a closer look at what really happened. The heat in Rockfield had a weight to it. It didn't just burn, it pressed. The sun poured down like syrup over the dusty shoulders of U.S. Route 189, shimmering off cracked windshields and faded storefront signs that hadn't changed since Carter was in office. Franklin Hayes, 82, parked his rust-stained 1971 Chevy C10 beside Beck's gas and tire, his worn boots stepping onto the concrete like they remembered how to move before he did. He wasn't in a hurry. He hadn't moved quickly since 1972, not since a bullet tore through his left hip while dragging his captain to a chopper in Laos. He adjusted his Korean War veteran's cap, the stitching worn, the bill curled upward by decades of sun. He didn't wear it for show. He wore it because it was the only thing that ever stayed on his head when wind passed through the Texas plains. Franklin moved slow, but steady. Steady enough to make it to the icebox for a bottle of water. Steady enough to grab his veteran's discount card, laminated years ago, edges frayed like everything he owned. He stepped out again and turned toward the pump. That's when the bikers saw him. They weren't old. They weren't even dangerous in the way danger used to be measured. 5 of them. Loud bikes, shiny chrome. Vests full of patches that meant nothing. They leaned against their machines like gods of the road, though none looked a day over 30. Not a trace of real fatigue in their bodies. Not a line of sorrow in their faces. Their tattoos were fresh, their words sharper than their wit. "Yo, check out Gramps," one called out. "Nice antique, man. That thing run on coal." Probably stole it off a museum lot. Franklin didn't answer. He didn't even glance their way. He just kept his eyes on the pump, lifted the nozzle, and began to fuel the truck. He'd been shot at in darkness. He'd swum through jungle rivers thick with leeches and God knows what. This wasn't even background noise. But silence sometimes feels like provocation. One of the bikers peeled off from the pack. He had a cigarette in his mouth and a chip on both shoulders. He walked like someone who needed the world to notice. "That rig even pass inspection, old man?" he asked, running a hand along the dented side of Franklin's truck. Franklin met his gaze calmly, blue eyes still clear behind weathered skin. "Still runs." The biker snorted. "So does my grandma's pacemaker. Don't mean it belongs on the road." Franklin turned back to the pump. He'd learned in war, and again in life, that not every battle is worth your breath, but youth often mistakes silence for weakness. "You hear me, Grandpa?" The biker pushed. "I'm talking to you." Another biker knocked the gas can from Franklin's hand. Fuel spilled onto the pavement. A hiss, a splash, a warning. Franklin crouched to retrieve it, slow and careful. That's when the shove came. He fell hard. Concrete is cruel to the elderly. His hip struck first, an old wound reignited, his palm scraped. A tremor of pain surged up his spine and across his ribs. He bit back a sound but couldn't stop the blood as it began to roll, thin and red, from his temple. The bikers laughed, not cruelly, not kindly, just emptily. The way people laugh when they don't know what reverence means. A teenager across the lot lifted his phone and recorded it. No one stepped in. A woman herded her daughter into a minivan. A cashier peeked out the store window, then disappeared. Franklin lay still for a moment, not because he couldn't rise, but because he needed a second to absorb the truth. This was the America he'd bled for, and now it looked away. He rose slowly. Dignity like armor. He said nothing, got back into his truck, started the ignition. His eyes never left the rearview mirror, but not in anger, in quiet, unflinching resolve. The bikers, confused by his silence, didn't pursue him. They let him go. But something in Franklin's stillness had unnerved them. The laughter didn't follow him home. But a tremor had started in him, not from pain, from something far older, from a promise unbroken. He didn't drive to the hospital, he didn't go home. He pulled into Macklin's auto, a garage off Main, hoping to get the Chevy's clunking engine diagnosed. The receptionist, a young man in a grease-stained T-shirt, barely looked up. "Truck's old," the boy muttered after a glance. "Ain't worth fixing. Parts like that don't exist anymore." Franklin nodded once. He didn't argue. He just turned the key again, shifted into drive and rolled away, past the flagpole, the war memorial, and the grocery store where the cashier always called him "Sir," without knowing why. In the center of Rockfield sat a park, one oak tree, one splintered bench, and one man, now nursing a head wound, bruised ribs, and a heart heavier than all his medals combined. Franklin sat beneath the tree. He took out a handkerchief, dabbed at the cut above his brow, and let the pain settle. A boy nearby looked over, lemonade in hand. He started to walk forward, but his mother pulled him back, whispered something sharp in his ear, and shook her head. The boy hesitated, then turned away. Franklin closed his eyes. His fingers reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt. Out came a folded photograph. 8 men in jungle fatigues, arms slung over each other's shoulders. On the back, one line, "Whiskey Team, the ones who came back," and behind that photo a card yellowed, creased. "Emergency only, Whiskey Team 1972, and a phone number. He had never used it. Not for war, not for grief, not even after losing his wife to cancer and his son to a car wreck. But today felt different. He took out his old flip phone, fingers trembling not from age but from a pain that felt spiritual. He dialed. Once, twice, 3 rings. Then, verification code? "Please," he froze. But the code came back to him like muscle memory. "Whiskey 72 Delta. Sergeant Major Franklin Hayes." A pause, then a voice of steel. "Stand by for confirmation. Sergeant Major Hayes, what's your situation?" Franklin exhaled. "I need the team." No questions asked. Just 3 words in return. Words that struck like a drumbeat in the bones of a brotherhood long thought dormant. "Help is coming." The call went out at 1600 hours. Across 3 states, in homes, garages, cabins, and offices, the same words repeated across secure lines. "Whiskey Team emergency activation. Sergeant Major Hayes has made contact." In a brick house in Augusta, Georgia, Colonel Marcus Harrington, 77, stood up from his recliner, stiff joints popping like old branches. He reached for a cabinet no one but him had opened in decades. Inside lay a perfectly folded black T-shirt, embroidered with the Special Forces insignia. In York, Pennsylvania, Master Sergeant David Razor Reeves excused himself from dinner with his grandchildren. "Just an old friend needing help," he said quietly, before unlocking a metal footlocker beneath the bed. Dust rose like memory. In Roanoke, Virginia, Captain Michael Jenkins dropped a fly rod mid-cast into Lake Bellamore and simply walked off the dock without a word. His friends watched him go, confused, but said nothing. There was something unexplainable in his silence. And in Baltimore, Dr. Thomas Wilson, once the medic of the team, closed his clinic early, citing a family emergency, to his receptionist. He didn't mention the black bag in his trunk, pre-packed since the late 90s. They moved, quiet, purposeful. Decades older, but still lethal. They didn't hesitate, didn't ask, "What happened?" They heard, "Franklin Hayes," and that was all they needed. Meanwhile, back in Rockfield, the summer evening settled into a golden hush. Franklin sat still on that old park bench, blood dried on his temple, memories stirring with every distant footstep. He didn't flinch when the bikers returned, now revving their engines, circling the edge of the park like dogs testing a fence line. One even performed a wheelie near the playground. Mothers scattered. Children shrieked. Still, Franklin didn't move. He didn't need to, because they were coming. 48 minutes after the call, the first black SUV pulled into the park. Government plates. A discreet Special Forces insignia, windows tinted pitch. It stopped at the south entrance, silent, engine low. 3 minutes later, a second arrived, opposite direction. Then a third, a fourth. A fifth. They formed a perfect containment ring, cutting off exits, forming what veterans called a soft box. The bikers noticed. One laughed. Cops. They gonna ticket us. Then the doors opened, all at once. What stepped out wasn't police. They didn't wear uniforms. They didn't need to. Each man moved with a quiet synchronization that only came from years spent operating in the dark, beyond headlines, beyond thanks. They weren't young anymore, but they were built like stone walls. Gray hair, weathered hands, black shirts with a subtle dagger, an arrow patch over the heart. Not one of them said a word. They didn't need to. Their mere presence pulled gravity tighter around the park. Colonel Harrington reached Franklin first. He didn't speak right away. He dropped to one knee, not out of weakness but respect. "Sergeant Major Hayes," he said clearly, his voice carrying like a slow drumbeat across the still park. "Whiskey team reporting as requested." But Franklin didn't smile. But his eyes watered. Just enough. "You didn't all have to come." David Reeves stepped forward, resting a hand on Franklin's shoulder. "All of us or none of us." That was the rule. Thomas Wilson, the medic, began checking Franklin's head wound, professionally quiet. Captain Jenkins scanned the perimeter, watching the bikers now frozen mid-posture. "Who did this?" Wilson asked, gently cleaning dried blood with a gauze pad. Franklin nodded once toward the group of bikers. And that's when the temperature changed. Colonel Harrington turned slowly to face the men who had laughed at an old man bleeding on hot pavement. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply walked until he was close enough for the lead biker to see the combat scar, running from his right temple to his jaw. "You laid hands on a Medal of Honor recipient," Harrington said flatly. The words rippled through the crowd. People had gathered. Phones were recording. One of the bikers chuckled nervously. "That guy, Medal of Honor. Get out of here, he's just some homeless grandpa." Jenkins stepped forward, pulled something from around his neck. Dog tags, yes, but attached to them was a tarnished Medal of Honor. He held it high. 1971. Laos. Sergeant Major Hayes led an unauthorized rescue of 14 American POWs. When extraction was compromised, he held off 36 enemy soldiers, bleeding from 3 wounds, refusing to leave until the last man boarded the chopper. He paused. "I was that last man." A woman gasped. Someone dropped their coffee. The lead biker blinked, took a step back. Franklin stood, wobbly at first, but then tall, straighter than he'd stood in years. The old soldier had returned. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The town that had ignored him now looked on in silence. Hats came off. People lowered their phones. A slow, rising respect spread through the air like thunder in reverse. A young biker, clearly shaken, stepped forward, voice shaking. "Sir, my grandfather was in Vietnam. If he saw what we did..." He trailed off. Franklin studied the boy for a long moment, then said quietly, "Then honor him by becoming someone he'd be proud of." From the final SUV, a young Army officer emerged carrying a polished wooden case. He approached Franklin with quiet precision and opened it to reveal a brand new Medal of Honor. "Your original was reported stolen in 1989, sir. The Department of Defense authorized a reissue. We've been trying to find you." Franklin stared at the medal. At its weight, its shine. He touched it with fingers that once carried wounded friends through fire. "I never wore it for recognition," he whispered. Harrington stepped beside him. "Exactly why you deserve it." The silence that followed the ceremony in the park wasn't empty. It was sacred. A pause carved out of noise. The kind of silence that makes people reflect, makes them see. For the first time in a long time, the phones stopped recording. The crowd didn't scatter. They just stood. Some removed their hats. Some blinked fast, embarrassed by their tears. Others just watched Franklin, this old man they'd passed countless times, like he was someone they'd never really noticed until now. And maybe they hadn't. The young biker, the one who'd stepped forward, stayed where he was. Still as a lamppost, hands clutched into fists. "My grandfather used to talk about the men he served with," he said, voice trembling. He told me they weren't loud about it. They just carried it. Quiet. He looked at Franklin, eyes glassy. If he saw what I did to you today, he'd disown me. Franklin didn't raise his voice, didn't scold. He simply looked the young man in the eye and said, then start being the kind of man he'd salute. The young biker broke. Shoulders sagging, he nodded. The others behind him followed suit, one removing his bandana, another wiping sweat from his neck, suddenly self-conscious under the gaze of history. From the final SUV, a young army officer stepped forward again, this time holding a small black folder. There's one more thing, sir, he said, his voice formal. The department has authorized a correction to the national record. Your rescue mission in 1971 is no longer classified. Your Medal of Honor citation will now include the names of those you saved, including Captain Jenkins. Franklin didn't reply. He only nodded once, the motion small but full of weight. Captain Jenkins placed a hand on his shoulder. It's not about the medal, Franklin whispered. It's about not being forgotten. You were never forgotten, Jenkins said, just unseen. As dusk rolled in, the park transformed. The black SUVs remained like silent sentries. Families returned cautiously. Children pointed. Local reporters arrived, led by a young woman holding a notebook and a face full of disbelief. By 8 p.m., a portable stage had been set up in front of the gazebo. The mayor, Helen Carver, late 50s, once a high school civics teacher, stepped onto it, adjusting the microphone with trembling fingers. 50 years, she said, looking out over the crowd. Sergeant Major Franklin Hayes has lived among us. He has bought our groceries, walked our sidewalks, parked his old truck outside our diners. She swallowed hard. And we never knew. Her voice cracked. We never knew that a Medal of Honor recipient lived right here in Rockfield, pumping his own gas, fixing his own roof, carrying memories most of us can't even imagine. She stepped aside. The mic squeaked. The wind stirred. Franklin Hayes walked to the podium. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like someone's tired grandfather in a wrinkled shirt. His walk was slow, his breathing measured. The crowd held its breath. He didn't speak right away, just looked at the faces, some familiar, most strangers. He didn't look angry. Just tired. I didn't call my team because I wanted attention. He began, voice deep but quiet. I called because I needed to remember that once upon a time, we didn't leave each other behind. No one moved. I don't blame anyone for not knowing who I was. That was my choice. I chose quiet. I chose peace. He looked down, fingers trembling as he held the edge of the podium. But today reminded me of something I forgot. That quiet doesn't mean invisible. That service doesn't stop when the war ends. He paused, looked to the side where 6 old men stood at attention. His team. If there's a lesson in today, it's to look again. Look again at the man pushing a walker across a parking lot. Look again at the woman with tremors in her hands, counting change at the grocery store. You don't know what they carried, what they still carry. A beat. A breath. Some of us wear medals on our chest. Some carry scars in silence. But both deserve to be seen. As he stepped down, the applause didn't start right away. It rose, like thunder rolling across the plains. First soft, then swelling into a standing ovation. But the sound that cut through it was small. A child's footsteps. A boy, maybe 7, broke away from his mother's grasp, his lemonade cup now gone, replaced by a handful of wildflowers picked hastily from a park garden bed. He walked toward Franklin, shoes slapping the concrete, tears in his eyes, but smiling. My dad's a soldier too, he said simply, handing the bouquet over. He says real heroes don't always wear uniforms. Franklin took the flowers as gently as one might lift a baby bird. Your dad's right, he said. The bravest people I knew wore their courage on the inside. Later that night, back at the small community church, the town held an impromptu gathering. It wasn't a fundraiser. It wasn't a political event. It was a moment of remembrance. Photos of Whiskey Team projected onto a white wall. A slow slideshow of the jungles they fought through, the helicopters they hung from, the brothers they buried. Franklin sat in the front pew. He didn't want the spotlight, but he stayed because the moment wasn't just about him. It was about them. about every man who came home to nothing, every woman who served and returned to silence, every soldier who quietly fought their way back into civilian life and faded behind a grocery cart or a pawnshop counter. Just before the event ended, the mayor stood once more. "We've created a Veterans Honor Committee tonight," she announced, "and we've unanimously agreed to raise a permanent monument right here in Oakview Park, dedicated not just to Sergeant Major Hayes, but to all who served and returned without fanfare." She paused. "The proposed inscription is simple: honor never fades. Respect those who served." The crowd nodded. For once, a town had remembered to look up. Outside the church, as the crowd trickled out into the evening air, the group of bikers stood waiting. They approached slowly, heads lowered. The leader, now without his leather vest, held out his hand. "Sir," he said, "what we did was unforgivable. But if there's any way we can make it right." Franklin eyed him, said nothing at first. The man continued. "We've talked. Our club, we'd like to offer free escort services for military funerals, veterans parades, and memorial rides. No charge, no publicity, just respect." Franklin nodded once. "Then start tomorrow." Later that night, back at Franklin's modest home, the old Chevy truck sat in the driveway. But something had changed. 3 local mechanics, each of them veterans or sons of veterans, had already promised to restore it free of charge. They'd called it a matter of honor. And taped to the back bumper now was a fresh new sticker, "PRO Veteran NEVR Furrow 10. It was small, understated, but no longer hidden. The night air in Rockfield smelled of cut grass and rain that hadn't come yet. Franklin Hayes stood alone in his driveway, the porch light flickering weakly above him. He held a small envelope in his hand, one of many notes and cards pressed into his palms during the ceremony. But this one had no return address. He opened it. Inside was a single sentence, written in pencil. "You made me look at my father differently tonight." No name. No flourish. Just that. Franklin folded the note carefully and tucked it into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt, right next to his heart. That's where the real medals were kept now. He didn't sleep much that night. Most men his age didn't. The body forgets how. The mind refuses to. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table, a single lamp lighting the room, and laid out the items he'd carried all these years: the black and white photograph of Whiskey Team, the yellowed emergency contact card, the dog tags, a folded piece of paper with the words, "We were the lucky ones," scrawled in faded ink. He placed the new Medal of Honor next to them, but slightly apart. Not out of pride. Out of memory. "It never felt like mine," he whispered. "It always felt like theirs." He meant the men who didn't come home. At sunrise, Franklin returned to Oakview Park. Alone. The town was still asleep. The birds had just begun their morning debates. And, beneath the oak tree, on the same wooden bench, he sat with a quiet ache in his hip and a stillness in his breath. He wasn't waiting for anyone this time. He just needed to sit with the memory of it all. Then came the sound. Footsteps, slow, familiar. Colonel Harrington, no uniform, no medals. Just an old friend with a thermos of black coffee and 2 paper cups. "Thought you might need company," he said. Franklin didn't speak, just nodded. They sat in silence. 2 men, 80 years old, bones aching, eyes still sharp, a shared grief wrapped in unspoken words. "It's strange," Franklin finally said. "All these years I thought I was invisible. Turns out I was just hard to look at." Harrington didn't correct him. He just sipped his coffee, then finally said, "You weren't invisible. You were a mirror. And sometimes people don't want to see what courage really costs." Franklin turned to him. "Is that why we all hid after the war?" "Some of us," Harrington replied. "Others stayed loud. But most of us, we just wanted quiet." They watched the sunrise together, golden light stretching over the grass. Later that week, construction began at the park. A team of local volunteers, including some of the bikers, began laying the foundation for the monument. There were no contractors, no reporters, just people with shovels and sweat. And by the end of that month, a polished granite slab stood beneath the oak tree. The inscription read, "Ich honor Fais. Respetiti os macho sarvadi." Beneath that, in smaller lettering, "In memory of those who came home quietly." Franklin didn't attend the unveiling. He watched from a distance, sitting in his truck with the windows down, letting the moment belong to others. It wasn't about him. It never had been. But he did smile when he saw the little boy from the lemonade stand place a small American flag at the base of the monument, alongside the same bouquet of wildflowers, this time tied with a ribbon. And next to him stood the boy's mother, no longer pulling him away, just watching with eyes full of something she hadn't known how to express before. That evening, before sunset, Franklin made one final visit. He drove past the gas station where it all began. The manager, now aware of the national story, stepped out and offered a quiet salute as Franklin passed. He didn't return it, not out of rudeness, just peace. Then he stopped by Macklin's auto. The young mechanic who once turned him away came out red-faced. "Sir, I didn't know." "No, you do," Franklin replied. "I'd like to work on your truck. No charge." Whole shop agreed. Franklin nodded. "Then let's start with the brakes." They both smiled. That night, Franklin affixed one last sticker to the rear window of his newly restored truck. It didn't say hero. It didn't say veteran. It said SEN. Just that. One word. But enough. Not all heroes return home to parades. Some come back to silence. Some walk through grocery aisles unnoticed, their medals tucked in drawers, their stories locked in memories they no longer speak aloud. But dignity isn't loud. And courage rarely introduces itself. Franklin Hayes didn't need a crowd to become a hero. He just needed to be seen. In a world that moves faster every day, where we swipe past strangers and scroll past suffering, maybe it's time we pause and look again. Look at the man carrying his groceries alone. Look at the woman staring at a folded flag on her mantle. Look at the veteran sitting quietly in the park, hands trembling from wounds you cannot see. They didn't ask to be noticed. But we must choose to notice. Because true respect isn't a holiday. It's a habit. And the quietest lives often carry the loudest truths. So the next time you pass someone who seems invisible, stop. Offer your eyes. Offer your kindness. Offer your respect. Because sometimes the person we overlook is the one who gave us the freedom to walk by in peace. Have you ever seen someone strong treated unfairly, just because they were quiet, or someone humble ignored, until the day they broke? Share their story in the comments. Let their names be spoken here. And if Franklin Hayes moved your heart today, subscribe to our channel. Not for us, but for every hero like him, whose story deserves to be remembered, not just recited. Let's keep honoring them. Not once, not when the cameras are rolling, but every day, in every small moment. Because respect never goes out of style, and neither does a quiet hero